And then the fall months, this is especially important because we're not able to come in and rescue. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all you are having a wonderful day. It is Wednesday, October 9th here in South Georgia, and today we're finally going to get some cool season transplants in the ground right here behind me. And I'm going to tell you why my #1 garden tip is even more important in the fall. So it's finally cooled off for good around here. It feels great out here today, breezy, low 70s, overcast, and I think tomorrow night we're supposed to get into the 50s. We're still going to have a few days in the 80s, I'm sure, over the next month and a half, but for the most part we're done with those 80-degree days, and that means we can get some fall transplants in the ground. I could have planted things sooner, but I would have had to kind of baby those transplants on those hotter days, give them some overhead water, give them a splash to cool them off, and I didn't want to fool with all that. So just waited until it looks like things are cooled off for good. Now we're ready to go. And our transplants are ready to go after getting a leggy start in the seed trays we started them in. So we had to step them up to these 2.5 inch pots. And for the most part, they're looking pretty good. Had a couple of them that just didn't make the transition very well, but the majority of them look nice and ready to go. So here's one of our Bravo cabbage transplants that we'll be planting today, and I'll show you the root ball on these. So we got a pretty nice root ball, not necessarily root bound yet, so that's what we're going for. We want a nice root ball, but we don't want this thing to start wrapping real tight, because that means we're going to have a lot of transplant shock, and it's going to take a while for this thing to get going once we put it in the ground. So looks like our timing's pretty good with our transplants here. And we're going to be planting those on this side of this particular no-till plot here, which has been performing pretty well for me lately. Was going to plant a cool season cover crop here, but I got to thinking it's been a while since I've planted any cool season veggies in this plot. Probably work better with my rotation. So cool season veggies on that side. Those transplants today, and may end up putting some garlic right there. And we're going to do our cool season cover crop in that plot over there on the other side of those onions. So I've already got my rows laid out, got the drip tape down in those furrows. We're going to be planting some collards, some kale, broccoli, cauliflower, and some cabbage out here today. Now those rows that I eyeballed and laid out are probably about 3.5, 4 foot apart, which is farther apart than they need to be, but I like to have room to work between the rows, carry me a basket in there, and harvest my stuff when it gets ready. So I like to have a little extra room. You could plant some of this stuff on a 2-foot row spacing if you wanted to, really pack it in there, but you're not going to have a whole lot of room to move around. So probably 3 to 4 foot spacing is a little bit better if you've got the space to do that. So like I said, we're going to be planting collards, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage today. And one thing that a lot of people don't think about when they're doing something like this is the fact that these veggies are going to mature at different times. And so we need to space them within that plot accordingly. For example, I know that those collards and kale are going to be there a lot longer than the broccoli and the cauliflower and even the cabbage. So I want to plant my row of collards and kale on the end of the plot, because I know those will probably be there well into next spring. If I plant that row of collards and kale in the middle of the plot, then I'm kind of boxing myself in a little bit down the road. When I want to plant something else where the broccoli and cauliflower was after it's done, I don't have as much flexibility. So plant the longer range veggies on the edge of the plot, the shorter maturing stuff towards the inside of the plot. And so that's what we're going to do here. We'll have the collards and kale on this outside row, then we'll have a row of cabbage, which won't be here as long as the collards and kale, but will be here longer than the broccoli and cauliflower that we put in this inside row. And as far as plant spacing goes, I'm working with a drip tape that has a 6-inch emitter spacing, so I've got quite a bit of flexibility here. Now, I wouldn't want to put the stuff we're planting today on a 6-inch plant spacing. That's just way too close for things like cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower. You can get away with it on lettuce sometimes, but for broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, the things we're going to be planting today, you at least want to have a 1 foot plant spacing. But since I don't need necessarily 30 plants per row, and I've got that 6-inch emitter spacing on the drip tape, I think I'm going to put mine 18 inches apart today. I couldn't do that if I had a drip tape with a 12-inch emitter spacing. I could only put them 1 foot apart or 2 foot apart, but with the 6-inch emitter spacing we can go 18 inches, and I think that's going to work out well. Give those plants a little more room to spread out. And since I'm doing an 18-inch plant spacing, I'm not going to just sprinkle my pre-plant fertilizer all along the furrow like we normally do. Instead, I'm going to do it much like we do when we plant tomato or pepper plants. Just going to put a little handful beside each plant. Which leads us into a discussion about my #1 garden tip, which you've probably heard before if you've been watching the channel for a while, and that is to always put down some type of balanced fertilizer every time you plant. Now, there are a select few people out there that may have soil healthy enough where they don't have to fertilize at all, but for the majority of us, we're going to need to supplement our plants, and supplementing them early is the key to success. Some veggies like lettuce, all they need is that little bit of pre-plant fertilizer. For other things like the cabbage we're going to be planting today, we'll have to give them a little more as they grow. But putting down that pre-plant fertilizer ensures some success in the beginning, helps those plants get off to a really good start. And so the key here is just to use something that's relatively balanced. Doesn't have to be perfectly balanced. You can see this is 3, 3, 4, so it's not exactly balanced. Use something relatively balanced. It could be synthetic, doesn't have to be organic. It could be liquid. It doesn't have to be granular. You could do it like a soil drench. Just put down some type of balanced fertilizer when you plant. You could do it before planting. You could do it at planting like we're doing today. And in doing so, you'll get your plants off to a really nice, healthy start. They'll be able to create a big, nice, extensive root system, which is what all plants need. And then the fall months, this is especially important because we're not able to come in and rescue some underperforming plants as fast as we are in the warmer months. And this is especially the case if you're using organic fertilizers. Now, we don't have any issues down here getting organic fertilizers to break down and feed the plants in the cooler months when there's not as much enzymatic activity in the soil, but it's definitely slower. So if we have a plant that's not looking that great, not growing as well as it should, we can't come in and immediately rescue it that great in the cooler months like we can in the warmer months, because fertilizers, especially organic fertilizers, tend to work slower this time of year. So getting it down at planting gives us time for it to break down and be available to those plants and keep them nice and healthy throughout the entire grow out. And it's really important for some of these faster maturing single harvest veggies like broccoli and cauliflower. If you don't get broccoli and cauliflower plants off to a good start, a lot of times, you know, you're just going to have a suboptimal harvest. As I've told you before, you got to grow a big broccoli plant to get a big head of broccoli. And if that plant struggles early on, yeah, you're still going to get some type of broccoli head, but you're probably not going to get a nice broccoli head. So we got to give that plant a nice jump start in the beginning, make sure it's healthy in the beginning so that we can get that big plant and that big head of broccoli. Another thing is we want to try to harvest some of this stuff before it gets real cold, say in early January. We could put a cabbage plant in the ground, not feed it a whole lot, and it would just hang out there and grow really slow. We would eventually get our cabbage head maybe 4 months down the road. But if we feed that cabbage plant well, it will grow out a lot faster. We'll get that nice head of cabbage a lot faster. So if you're crunched for time and you're worried about how much time you have before it gets really cold, important to put down that pre-plant fertilizer. Make sure those plants have some good nutrients early so they can, you know, perform as well as they can perform. All right, so enough talking, let's do it to it. I've already got my plants laid out here 18 inches apart at the beginning of the row here. So these collared plants, we put one plant by an emitter, skip over 2 emitters, put another plant. That gives us that 18-inch spacing. I did put my kale plants 1 foot apart down here at the end of the row, just because those don't take up quite as much room as these big collared plants, and I wanted to squeeze a little more in this row than I was going to get doing 18 inches all the way down. So we plant all this stuff, the greens, the broccoli, the cauliflower, the cabbage, pretty much the same way. We don't need to plant it real deep. Unless our plants are really leggy, then we might want to plant them a little deep. So we're just going to shimmy them out of these little pots here. See, we've got a nice root ball there on those. A little bag of fertilizer open up here, just a small handful right here. Don't want to dump it all in just one little spot. Kind of spread it around this plant here a little bit, and then just put that puppy in the ground, pull some soil around it. Like I said, not too deep, just kind of right there where that root ball was. That should be deep enough. And we'll get a nerding in the ground right here. A little fertilizer down, get her plant out. And these cheaper pots here, sometimes it's easier to get the plants out of these cheaper pots than it is those more rigid 2.5-inch pots that we've got. So that's why I use these. Put it down there, get some dirt around it. And we'll keep shimmying down the road till we get them all planted. And there we go, we got it all planted. So we got some flash collards, some old-timey blue collards, some darker boar kale, and some black magic kale in that row. Here we've got some Bravo cabbage, some capture cabbage, and some Amaro red cabbage at the end. And in this row we've got some green magic broccoli, some imperial broccoli, some purple cauliflower, and some amazing cauliflower. And now that we've cooled off pretty well, I shouldn't have to baby these a whole lot now. If we get a rogue day in mid to high 80s, yeah, I might have to give them a little splash if they start looking a little rough. But I think just with the drip tape, we'll be able to keep them happy as long as we don't get too hot again. Now I'll go ahead and address this question now, because I know somebody's going to put it in the comments. Somebody's going to ask, how do you keep the deer and rabbits from eating this stuff? So the way we do it around here, every fall we have an annual wildlife meeting. In fact, we just had our meeting last week. We gather all the animals from those pine trees, mainly back there. It's mostly cottontail rabbits that attend, and we just have a little honest discussion. You might want to call it a difficult conversation. And I explain to those rabbits mostly that if they come and start nibbling on my collards and broccoli and cabbage plants, that there will be some serious consequences. And I also extend the olive branch somewhat and explain to them that very soon I will be planting some clover and some other really delicious cool season veggies that will be closer and easier for them to access than these here cool season veggies we planted today. And they can eat all of that stuff they want. So we have that agreement in place, and they know what happens if they violate the terms of that agreement. So I hope you enjoyed the video today. Let me know in the comments below how your cool season gardening is going so far. And if you want to know how we continue to feed these veggies that we just put in the ground, a really simple fertilization plan for cool season plants, watch this video right here and we'll break it all down for you. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.